The shadow of Anne Frank looms over the 2016 election. I'm Faith Chatham, and this is the second part of this op-ed. In my journey to discover if the Frank family truly sought political asylum in the United States, I discovered that the New York Times, Time Magazine, and Reuters covered the story in 2007 when documents were uncovered of correspondence between Otto Frank and some of his American friends. Her father, Otto Frank, appealed to his college friend Nathan Straus Jr. for a $5,000 bond and for affidavits to help get his family into the United States. Straus was the head of the Federal Housing Authority and a personal friend of Eleanor Roosevelt, and his father was a co-owner of Macy's department store. In their 2007 story, when the documents were uncovered, the New York Times said, "Page by page, the papers illustrate the tortuous process for gaining entry into the United States in those days. Even with powerful connections and money, European Jews could not overcome the State Department's restrictions against refugees. By June 1941, no one with close relatives still in Germany were allowed into the United States because of suspicions that the Nazis might use them to blackmail refugees into clandestine cooperation. So even if you had your only living relatives were in a concentration camp and were known to be dissidents to the Third Reich, you were considered too dangerous to allow into the United States. If you were a child, you were considered too dangerous to allow into the United States. That development, that policy, ended the possibility of getting the Frank girls out through a children's rescue agency. And those of us who have read The Diary of Anne Frank, most of us know that she and her relatives, most of them died in a concentration camp. Because of the uncertainty, Otto Frank finally decided to try to get into Cuba, and he applied for a visa for himself, which was granted on December 1st. But 10 days later, Germany, Italy declared war on the United States, and Cuba canceled that visa. So it's very unlikely that he ever even knew that it had been granted. In a 2007 Time Magazine article, they reported that Straus and Otto Frank's brother-in-law, Julius Hollander, regularly corresponded with two private Jewish agencies, the National Refugee Service in New York and the Boston Committee for Refugees. Straus also contacted the State Department on Frank's behalf. Hollander and his brother arranged affidavits from their employers of the E.F. Box Company and also from Harry Levine of the New England Novelty Company, both who lived in Massachusetts. But on September 5th, 2015, Anne Frank's stepsister, Eva Schloss, drew direct parallels between the Syrian refugee crisis and the Jewish refugee crisis of World War II. Eva Schloss wrote, "You must not be selfish and you must share whatever you have and help in desperate situations. They need help from you. These people have had the courage to do a very difficult thing. To take their family and their whole life to another country requires bravery and strength. This is history repeating itself. These Syrians are valuable, educated people. They are doctors and nurses who are only too willing to help our society, and they will become leaders in the community if you will let them." Anne's mother, Edith, wrote to a friend in 1937, "I believe that all of Germany's Jews are looking around the world but can find no place to go." In closing, I am acutely aware of how important it is for us to be discerning, to distinguish fact from fiction, to not allow fear to overrule compassion, and not to allow compassion to endanger us. There must be a balance between policies which label victims as criminals. American policy rejected admission of the Frank children to safety in the United States, leading to their deaths in a German death camp, citing the possibility that some relative of a refugee remaining in Europe might be used as a spy for the Nazis. Fear is a paralyzing force. It sometimes comes from being touched by evil. Other times it prompts us to be overreaching in our denial of refuge and kindness. When political leaders play on it to gain power, inciting people to greater selfishness and hatred, as we have seen occur in this political election this year in 2016 in the United States. It takes on a life force of its own. We have to be careful if we are to remain alive, and we also must be wary not to allow fear to rob us of active compassion if we are to remain human. This is Faith Chatham, and this is this last part of a two-part op-ed on the shadow of Anne Frank looms over the 26th election. Thank you very much.